So now let's have some questions. Anybody have questions? We can talk about questions and answers now. Anybody have a question? You.
It was an entirely different issue.
Say again?
What about Watergate? Was that?
Well, I mean, Watergate was, was a crime, a foible of the Nixon administration. But, when I talk about the succeeding government is illegitimate, that's after a coup d'etat. When there's a coup d'etat, as we had with the murder of John F. Kennedy, the succeeding government that overthrows that government is illegitimate. That's what I say. Wait, question back there in the back, sir.
Yeah. During your presentation, you talked about two films that showed aircraft flying into buildings as if to precondition Americans to expect what's to come.
Yeah.
Have you seen any films in the last maybe 2 or 3, 5 years that give you a clue as to what may still yet to become true here in America?
That's a good question. I don't see that many films. So in the last 2 years, I could probably count the number of films I've seen on both hands. So I'm not the guy to ask, but there was another film by Arnon Milchan that was made in 1986 called Brazil. And it was kind of like a cult film, a very unsettling film, a futuristic film. And in this movie, Brazil, which Arnon Milchan produced, Terry Gilliam wrote it, terrorism is a fact of life. Terrorism occurs every day. It's a futuristic film where people are at a restaurant and a bomb goes off, and the waiters bring out some screens and put up the screens and the music plays on. And in the background of this future, Robert De Niro plays the key role. In this film, the nation is constantly fighting a war of terrorism, against terrorism, in some far, far off place. Now that movie came out in 1986, and that movie depicted exactly the reality we're living in today. And that's another product of this Israeli intelligence agent, Arnon Milchan. So it's like he was aware of this long-range plan back in the 1980s and made films that depicted that reality that has now come about. And Arnon Milchan is not just some small Israeli agent. He was the main agent who was involved in bringing nuclear triggers from this country to Israel. And when the Department of Justice discovered that he had smuggled 850 of these nuclear triggers, the United States demanded that Israel give these triggers back. Israel gave back half of them. Question back there.
In taking a look at 9/11 and the possibility that our government was involved with it, obviously, and given the fact that the Hegelian dialectic is used quite a bit in the terror false flag, could it be that because it is so obvious that it was an inside job and there was so much evidence to show that it was, that at some point in the future, part of this whole scheme is that we're eventually found guilty, that the United States government is found guilty of being complicit, and then that gives UN or whoever the right to come in and try the country? And
no, I would say that, I've looked at this from all sides now, and there's no indication that this was an inside job done by any Americans. This was not an inside job. It's done as an inside job in the same way that a tapeworm is an inside job. A tapeworm is a foreign invader in your body who gets inside. And that's exactly what we find here. We find that the people who were involved in plotting and carrying out this crime were Israelis or American Zionists whose first allegiance is to the state of Israel. And they're the ones, so that this is why, like you maybe have seen, that the 28 pages has now been released. And the 28 pages is all about basically trying to pin the blame on Saudi Arabia by simply just the fact that some Saudi Arabia guy before 9/11, years before 9/11, helped out a couple Saudi Arabian guys in California, a little bit of money. And that these two chaps, these two Saudi Arabian guys, are named as having been on Flight 77. But wait a minute, let's go back to Flight 77. There's no indication that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. So whether one Saudi gave some other Saudis some money is a moot point, because there's no indication that Saudi Arabia played any sort of major role in the planning of 9/11 at all. The planning for 9/11, the ideation, the carrying out, the cover-up, and the legacy is all an Israeli product, a Zionist project. So it's not, it was never done, it was never an American operation, but the Zionists have infiltrated our government to such a level. I mean, as you see, the top law enforcement in the country on that day was headed by an Israeli agent. Michael Shertoff, question here.
Well, doesn't that overlook the fact, or ignore the fact, that many millions of Americans are Zionists, including members of the U.S. military and the U.S. government and other institutions, and that many of these people are running our system in various institutions in great numbers.
Like Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, you know, in that press, or in that leaked video, leaked email, she says that the best way to help Israel, she's the American Secretary of State. Her first concern should be helping the United States of America. But she was saying the best way to help Israel is to use force to overthrow Syria. So it's as you say, of course. I just came from Spokane, Washington, and I began that presentation by asking how many people in the room were considered themselves to be devoted supporters of the State of Israel. Half the hands went up. So I knew I was dealing with an audience that had some hostility to this thesis. But there was only one guy who actually got out of line and heckled me. But it is as you say. There are millions of Christian Zionists in this country, and millions of people, or many of the people at the top level of our government, are de facto Zionist agents. When Bibi Netanyahu went and spoke to Congress about a year ago, he got 29 standing ovations from assembled members of Congress. 29 standing ovations. And this is a man who is the mastermind of the war on terror and 9/11. So it's obscene beyond our imagination how far gone this country is with the Zionism. Zionism is basically, I would say, a false prophet. You know, they say that in the end times people will be deceived and there will be false prophets. The whole idea of Israel being a sanctuary for the Jewish people and everything is a false prophet. Question there.
How and when did Israel get this stranglehold on American culture?
It's been a gradual process, and as you may know, actually the Jewish community was strongly anti-Zionist in the 40s and the 30s. American Jews saw themselves wanting to be Americans and assimilate in America. But gradually, especially since the 1960s, more and more and more it has become that they have infiltrated, and it's been primarily due to their power of the media and academia. Firstly, in the media, the American people have only been given like the rose-colored version of Israel, the Exodus version, you know, the Paul Newman version of Israel, and thinking that Israel is like the city on a hill. And in academia, because the history of Zionism, the history of Israel is not taught. I know, I studied Israel-Palestine at University of California. There were no courses on the history of Zionism because they don't want, the Israelis and the Zionists don't want the American kids to study this history, because if you study it, if you just crack a book on it, you will be shocked by its savagery and its criminality. So that's why Zionism is not taught. And there's a very good, you know, the Israelis are the best sources of Israeli history, actually. And there's a book called The Encyclopedia of Zionism and Israel, printed in 1970 in Israel. And I used that, back in Sweden, the library has a copy of that. And it's a 2-volume set. And you can read about how it all started. The Rothschilds started Zionism by creating secret societies in Eastern Europe. You know, groups called B'nai Moshe, Sons of Moses, B'nai B'rith, obviously, in New York, and the Lovers of Zion. And what they did is they went into the Jewish communities in Eastern Europe and preached this doctrine, this political doctrine, that you Russian Jews or you Belarusian Jews or Ukrainian people, you need to learn Hebrew and go to Israel, go to Palestine. And so they started pushing people there because they wanted to create this Rothschild state, but they needed people. And the people weren't coming, so they had to sometimes, you know, put a bomb behind them. Like in Iraq, the Iraqi Jews didn't want to go to Palestine. They didn't want to go to Palestine in 48. So Mossad went into Baghdad and put bombs in the synagogues to scare the Jews to go to Palestine. And it's been like that all along. But I mean, they've gradually, through the control of academia, the political establishment, and the media, they have given us this reality, you know. It's kind of like Wag the Dog. It's all fantasy. You know, every year you get a Holocaust film, and you maybe get some pro-Israel films, and the TV is very pro-Israel, and the media will never, ever tell you anything sort of like discouraging or truthful about Israel. You know, the Palestinians are always the terrorists, and the Israelis are always the good guys. Question?
When they announced the release of the 28 pages from the commission, they also said the lawyers were happy for the families that were suing the government. And
you wonder why? Because there are going to be big lawsuits. There will be lawsuits coming out of this. and they will do like they did with Iran. The lawyers are going to be very happy because they're going to sue Saudi Arabia. They're going to say that this is indication that Saudi Arabia is like involved in 9/11. Therefore, we're going to hold you responsible. Cough up some money this way, and the lawyers are going to make money like.
But are they talking about first responder families? They're not talking about the families that took the settlements.
It could. Well, it could be. It could include all. It could be because now, because it's not the same. They're not going to sue the airlines. They're now going to sue Saudi Arabia. So anybody can join that lawsuit who has some standing for suffering, right? So it'd be first responders. It would be the people who on the planes. Anybody who was affected by 9/11 could join the lawsuit and ask and go for the deep pockets of Saudi Arabia.
One other quick question.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to Michael Rupert, from the Wilderness?
Yeah. Well, he supposedly committed suicide or was suicided in Sausalito, California, I think it was. What?
Well, why did he commit suicide?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. It's a good thing. I met Michael Rupert on one occasion in New York back in 2002 or something like that, where I wound up speaking. And I was backstage and I said, "Hello, Mr. Rupert," and he wouldn't go near me because his organization, from the Wilderness, was being controlled by, in my opinion, there were two people that were at very high level at that time. Jamie Hecht, from the Hecht family of Hollywood, Jewish family, and Jenna Orkin. And Jenna Orkin was completely against she was trying to shut me down every way she could. Because my analysis was I was the only one out there talking about Israeli involvement in 9/11 from the beginning. And so she tried to prevent me from speaking in Europe, for example, and did a lot of things like that. But these were the people that were controlling him. And they got him to go along with this notion that 9/11 happened because of peak oil. Peak oil being the idea that we were at the top of the discovery of oil, and from now on the oil discoveries would be tapering down. And so that was the kind of like the false premise they sold him. He swallowed it, and I don't know why he killed himself or if he was killed. I don't know. But it may, who knows? Who knows? I wouldn't speculate. What question there?
I wish I could remember where I read this, but videos of Israel giving medical treatment to ISIS and then treating them and sending them back.
Yes.
So
yes,
that to me
true.
showed.
Yes, that's true. That's true. It's actually been on Israeli TV that ISIS actually has an enclave right on the Israeli border in the Golan Heights. If you look at ISIS-controlled territory, you will see right on the Israeli border there's ISIS-controlled territory. And so what they do is that Israeli TV has shown this, that when some of these anti-government fighters, these Syrian militia guys or ISIS fighters, are badly wounded, they're brought to that border, and Israeli military ambulances take them to a hospital in northern Israel where they're treated, and then when they're getting better again, they're brought back and sent back into the war. And so it's like the Israelis are helping very much in the operation. Of course, the Israelis bomb Syria now and then as well. So it's like, again, we're seeing a situation where the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel are actually supporting anti-Western groups against the government of Syria because they wanted to destroy the government of Syria. But I think that you would have to say that the evidence indicates that they really don't want to overthrow the government of Syria. They want to destroy They want to destroy Syria first. If they wanted to get rid of Assad, they could just drop a bomb on his house and be done with him, right? But they don't do that. Rather, they're destroying the country and the infrastructure willy-nilly, and half the population is now displaced. So we've created this huge humanitarian disaster in Syria because they want to get rid of the president, but they don't want to do it. They want to do it slowly, like to extend the pain. This is criminal. This is immoral. And when you tell people that solving 9/11 is the war, people say, "What war? What war? We don't feel any war here. I'm going home and watch football now." And that's what they said to my wife in Sweden. My wife said that we were going to America on a tour, talk about 9/11 truth and ending the war. And the history teachers she works with said, "What war?" And my wife teaches Syrian refugees and Afghan refugees whose parents have been killed by ISIS. I'm just showing how disconnected people are in the West, because people in America, and we kind of like look at that war, oh, that's those Arabs fighting among themselves. That's those Muslims, We're the ones our country is the one who makes all that war fighting possible. We're the ones who have given all those Toyota trucks to those guys. There's one video where these convoy of Toyota trucks, ISIS, are going across the desert of Iraq, for minutes and minutes and minutes. At the very end of the convoy, you see an Apache helicopter pulling up the rear. The Apache helicopter is U.S. military, and he's protecting the ISIS column going across Syria or Iraq. Yep. Question there, sir.
Well, just another factoid that supports what you were saying is that the insurgents that went from Egypt into Libya and invaded and overthrew Gaddafi were heavily supported by the United States, both with their arms and materiel, but also with U.S. air support in many ways. Mm-hmm. And that after the fall of Gaddafi, it was widely reported in the media that hundreds and hundreds of these same mercenaries that had overthrown Gaddafi went to northern Iraq and Syria to join ISIS.
Right, right. As you say, it's a band of roving mercenaries who are very highly paid. And Mr. Putin of Russia has made that very clear in pronouncements that these characters that are waging war in Syria are a bunch of highly paid mercenaries who will basically go and serve whoever's paying them the most. That's the way it goes. Back there in the back row.
Yes, I have a mini situation like this when you're saying we should spread the truth and take me to Palash. I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Johns Hopkins Excuse me, Johns Hopkins employs more people in the state of Maryland.
Right.
With many institutions, 13 full hospitals and so forth. I was with an institute that was basically run by Israelis.
Was what?
Was run by Israelis.
Yes, yes.
It was completely a Jewish institute, and people would always go to Israel.
Yeah.
Now, the higher-ups, and one of them was the brother-in-law.
It was part of Johns Hopkins?
Yes. Yeah, well, Johns Hopkins, it grows, it just takes in things. And if it wants the land, it will take in whatever institute and then incorporate it. So
sure.
It was its own entity, but it was part of Hopkins, and it was run by Israeli Jews.
Right.
And the thing that as a fellow there, I was in developmental pediatrics. I was not in that administrative or anything.
Yeah.
But they were taking money from government programs meant to help severely handicapped children.
Yeah.
And they just go to Israel. They wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
These children weren't helped. Federal laws were being broken for education for handicapped children.
Yeah.
So it was a nightmare of a year, and I basically got through it. But at the end, I came to Portland, and I decided to do something about it, to blow the whistle. And it's at every level you go, you're stopped.
Yeah.
There's somebody there who prevents that word from getting out.
Yeah.
Whether it was on the Baltimore City Department of Education level, I would get calls from lawyers who would say, oh, explain it away, but this probably wasn't happening.
Yeah.
And I would say, where's your money going? Where is the grant money going? The Decade of the Brain in Congress was named to research all the technology of the brain and to see how it's applied to help these children. It wasn't applied, it was taken to goodness where. All I knew is that they didn't work, they went to Israel.
Right.
And lived most of the time in Israel and came back. But now, this didn't have to do with 9/11 per se, because this was in about 2000. Yeah. But I got up close and personal the fact that I kept hitting these walls to try and say, hey, look what's going on here. These children, this law's being broken, this money's being wasted, this is wrong. Yeah. And clear up to the federal level. I could not get it, but I wouldn't let it go. And I finally turned it in as fraud to the Treasury Department. And the man I talked to, they actually assigned someone to listen to me. And I told him, I said, you don't have to report back to me, but do something. Do something with what's going on. These children are dying on the wards. And then I gave it like 4, 5, 6 months to kind of just, and then I found out he'd been fired and nobody had any record of any of my reports. So
that's where it goes.
And on many level, you know, you can't, it seems like these things to the truth are blocked. That there are people in positions Or am I just paranoid? So when this happened at 9/11, I knew exactly who did it. I mean, it doesn't make sense for Arabs to have turned a tide.
Exactly. And you find the exact same thing with the 9/11 story, that at every point that it can be blocked, it's being blocked by an Israeli or a Zionist.
What do you, I mean, getting back to take meaningful action, I admire you. How do you have the courage to stand here and speak this truth?
Well, you know, if I happen to have a kind of a unique set of skills that I honed, because I had lived in Israel as a young kid, like 18, 19, 20. I lived in between Norway and Israel. I was a lifeguard in Israel in the summertime, and I spent time on this Israeli kibbutz, a Zionist kibbutz. And I learned very quickly that when I came back to the United States when I was 21 years old, I saw that in this country the media distorted completely the reality of Israel and Zionism. And I said, this is a recipe for disaster. And I've watched these disasters happen time and time and time again. From the attack on the Liberty, the 1982 bombing in Lebanon, all of that, the destruction of those Marines in Beirut. And I said, this is a recipe for disaster. But then I became very concerned in the year 2000 when George Bush was elected and they had Ariel Sharon in power in that country. I said, this is exactly the same constellation that brought us the war in Lebanon in '82, when Ronald Reagan and Menachem Begin. And I told people, this is not going to end well. And 8 months later, it did not end well. And from the very beginning, I understood that this was possibly an Israeli false flag terror attack when they arrested those 5 dancing Israelis in New Jersey that day. They were clearly in on the whole thing. That meant that Israeli Mossad was involved in the whole thing. So I began exploring it as a hypothesis that it was, in fact, an Israeli false flag terror attack. And I've discovered that, as you said, at every point of the matrix, you find an Israeli or a Zionist agent. Well, hello, who are they covering up for? The German death cult? The Saudis? They're covering up for Israel and the Zionist establishment. And Israel is only really like the fist on the body of the Zionist International. The heart of the Zionist International is the Rothschild family in the city of London. They own the private city of London, the 1 square mile in the middle of the inner temple. And this is where it's global. Israel is just the operational arm. It's the fist of the Zionist enterprise. But it's a global problem. Well, yeah, the Rothschilds very much. I tried to point out that the Rothschilds, they profit from this because we have to borrow money. The U.S. government borrows money for the war. That enslaves the American government more and more to the Rothschild banks because they're the ones who lend the bank and collect the interest. So the greater we become indebted, the greater control they have over us as a nation. And then they profit from the war making. Like, as I pointed out, the Rothschilds own the largest oil company in Kurdistan in the north of Iraq, where all the American troops are defending. So when they finally partition Iraq into Kurdistan, Sunnistan, Shiistan, the Rothschilds control the oil of Kurdistan, you see? And the Rothschilds and Murdoch control the oil of the Golan Heights. So when they partition Syria and the Golan Heights goes to Israel, whatever, they own the oil. So they always profit from the destruction. In Yugoslavia, the Rothschilds got Montenegro, the state of Montenegro. They always get the best pieces, they get the strategic minerals, and they collect the money. What a racket.
So what are they doing? Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, question.
What are they doing in this whole thing? People think we elect our presidents. I know we don't.
Yeah.
So how is Israel, what are they doing here with this particular election, which is so odd because we know Hillary's a Zionist, is Trump and Bernie. I mean, he's a socialist, but I know they've got to be working together, but most people think Trump versus Hillary. And I'm not buying any of it, but I know that it's tying in to our current, something is brewing here, and I don't even think we're going to have the election. But
Right. Well, I mean, I don't really like to wade into politics in these issues, but what I will point out is that none of the candidates are 9/11 truth. None of the candidates call for 9/11 truth. None of the candidates call for an investigation, although Trump has made sounds like he would support an investigation, okay? But he's playing the role of the wild-eyed populist, right, in this election. And our elections are very much, kind of like written in Hollywood, right? But Trump is very closely tied to the state of Israel, very closely. If you recall, the Trump Towers down in South Florida on Sunny Isles Beach, they basically created a little town in North Miami Beach called Sunny Isles Beach, and the Israelis built 3 gigantic towers on the beach, the tallest condominium towers on any shoreline in America, and they paid Trump to use his name. They call them Trump Plaza, Trump Casino, Trump. But the Israelis own them, the Deezer family, Gil Deezer. And he's tied to Israeli military intelligence and Israeli military. So Trump is like playing a game, a bit of a game. And we don't know what will come of this election. You know, like you said, anything's possible. And the amount of terrorism and the amount of chaos that's brewing up, like in right now, it's scary. And so we don't know what's going to happen in Cleveland next week, or in Philadelphia next week, or what's going to happen anywhere. But terrorism is really, they are really throwing logs on the fire at a faster rate now. In the back row.
You talk quite a bit about Zionist-controlled institutions in this country, and I wanted to tell you that I'm a member of the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Against Israel organization. I do my own thing, but I'm affiliated with them. About a month ago, I went to a protest in Salem, Oregon on the Capitol steps. A Franklin Graham, what's the last? Graham. Yeah, Billy Graham's son basically was there. Huge turnout. And I had my signs there, Christians, dump Israel, signs of that nature. You can imagine the response I would get. And I could, when you're talking about institutions owned by Israel, maybe one of the things I'm not necessarily suggesting you talk about this, but the fact that evangelical Christianity is a wholly owned subsidiary of Zionism.
Right. Yes, exactly what I experienced in Spokane. In Spokane, they have these evangelical preachers who have converted a lot of the people of Spokane into card-carrying Christian Zionists. And it's like this one guy who heckled me wasn't making any sense at all, but he firmly believed it. It reminded me of what Mark Twain said. It's not so much what people know that's wrong, it's they know so much that ain't so. And that's where you get these Christian Zionists. They believe, the guy stood up and he said, there is no Israeli occupation of the West Bank. That's Judea and Samaria. It's like, whoa, how do you argue with people like that? Yeah. And, it's like, I recently saw a Palestinian who wrote about Zionism as being a psychopathic belief. And he compared it to, like, what if the Arabs were to say, Spain is ours. We were there 1,000 years ago. We built Cordoba and Seville and Granada, and we're going back there. And you Catholic Spaniards can go jump in the lake. That would be the same thing. You would say they're absurd. They're nuts. But the Israelis are allowed to say this, and nobody says they're nuts. Benjamin Netanyahu stood up in front of the United Nations, and he said, they found a shard of pottery in Israel, in Jerusalem, and it said, Benjamin Netanyahu. He said, that's my name. Well, his father's name was Milakovsky and was born in Warsaw. Hello? But he's so psychopathic he believes his own lies. The lady in the pink beret.
Okay, 2 things. First of all, how did you ever get to talk with Wesley Clark?
Oh, I didn't talk to Wesley Clark. Wesley Clark said that on Amy Goodman's show. He said it in several places. He spoke in San Francisco. And he said that. And about the same time, 2007, Wesley Clark appeared on the Amy Goodman show. And he recounted exactly what he had seen at the Pentagon shortly after 9/11. And as I said, he said that in several speeches. And he's got a sharp mind. He remembers all seven countries right off the top of his head. I would have a hard time doing that. But what he said is that he revealed the game plan. In 2007, the game plan was already pretty far advanced. But he revealed that this was the plan, and as you can see, this plan does not benefit the American people in one single way. This is destructive. This is harmful to our nation. What we're now dealing with is what President Washington and President Jefferson warned us against. They warned us against having sort of like habitual relationship, a love, a friendship, or a distrust of any country. They said avoid these kinds of situations. Have commerce with all, trade with all, peace with all. But don't form any special alliance with any one country, because then that country's problems become your problems. That's exactly what Israel is doing. Israel is grafting their problems onto us. So like those 5 Israeli guys that were busted on 9/11, the guys that were clicking their lighters and photographing the burning trade towers and high-fiving and cheering, when those guys were captured by the New Jersey cops, they said, hey, you got the wrong guys. We're Israeli. We're your friends. The Palestinians are the problem. The Palestinians are your problem, not us. You see? That's the game they play, and they expect most Americans believe it. Another question?
So does Obama have any clue, or is he totally clueless?
A clue. How much of a clue does Obama have? Obama was created by the Chicago Zionist establishment. He was created by a man named Philip Morris Klutznick, who was the president of the International Order B'nai B'rith. He was the head of that B'nai B'rith. And his daughter, Betty Lou Saltzman, that's his own daughter, she's the person who presented Barack Obama to the Jewish community in Chicago in 1992 and said, Barack Obama will be America's first black president. And then she commissioned, with her daddy's money, she commissioned David Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel to create Obama to be a candidate. And they trained him, and they honed him, and they corrected him, and they built him, and they taught him. And then they created him almost like a golem. Like a golem, a Yiddish a creature to do the work for the Jewish people. And they foisted him. And what's interesting, I'm from Chicago. And when he was elected to Congress in 2004, he was elected in a campaign where there was only one horse running. The opposing candidate had dropped out from some sort of sexual problem. And so the candidacy for the Senate seat was only Barack Obama. And then that guy from Maryland, the black candidate from Maryland who was kind of conservative, I keep forgetting his name. He had run for president before. Who's that guy? Not Ben Carson, the guy from Maryland. He's a conservative candidate, but he's a black guy. He came over to Chicago and said, well, I'll run as the opposition. And he actually got 30% of the votes, even though he was from Maryland and had nothing to do with Illinois. But he did it only to make it look like it was a 2-horse race. But Obama has won 2 of his elections in exactly the same way. And that's what they do. That's what they're doing now also. You know, when they run John McCain against Obama, or when they run Dukakis against Bush, they're running some candidate who looks like is ridiculously weak. And what I fear what they're doing with Trump is that they're creating a candidate who destroys his own chances and throws the election basically, to Hillary. But one thing Trump is doing is clear is Trump is taking all of the attention of the race, and Hillary's just in the shadows. I mean, wait, come on, Hillary and the Clinton family have committed crimes in the last couple of weeks, just trying to cover up this email scandal, right? And it's like that doesn't really make it into the headlines because Trump's always doing something more spectacular. So it's like Trump is making all the noise, and Hillary's just in the shadow, just cruising along like a cruise missile.
And the head of the FBI that should put her in jail is part of the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And Bill Clinton goes and talks to the Attorney General at the airport. Question, sir.
2 questions. Brexit now looks to be like another money take that the Rothschilds put in place, like they did previous to World War II, where they came in and sort of scattered everybody, got them all confused and scared about bonds, and they sold all the bonds. Rothschilds have bought all the bonds, and then they turn around and say, oh, there's no problem, and then they profiteer from it. Right. Can you explain Brexit? Is this another sort of currency grab and more money laundering going on by the Rothschilds yet again? And then the next question, with children and hopefully down the road grandchildren, are we all going to become the United States of a Zionist state? Or are we all going to become the United States of Israel? Or where do you see us going?
Well, we already are the United States of Israel. I mean worldwide. Yeah. Oh, okay. Worldwide. Well, I mean, currently our country is giving more than $3 billion a year to that little country, and they are now trying to get Obama to sign this memorandum of understanding that would lock in $5 billion a year for the next 10 years. And all the while, Netanyahu says, we don't need American money. We can easily live without American money, as they argue for twice as much. Yeah? And they want to sign this before Obama leaves office because they figure Obama will be easier than whoever comes next. But the first part of your question about Brexit, I really don't know if this was... But clearly, the British people don't like the EU. And the feeling that the British people have for the EU is found all across the European Union. People don't like it because it's undemocratic. And one of the worst things is that now these nations have lost, when they're in the European Union, they have lost their own control over their own foreign policy. So they have to all go along with whatever the EU dictates. And the EU is not democratic. The EU is run by, it's like the United Nations, it's run by a commission that's not elected, the commissioners. The General Assembly of the United Nations is like powerless. The policies are created by these unelected guys at the top. And so people want out. And another thing why they want out is because the European Union is dictating how many refugees each one of these countries has to take. And many countries in Europe don't want it. Hungary, for example, they don't want millions of people to come into their country. They want to defend their country. But when you join the European Union, you lose that right. You lose the ability to say no to influxes of people that Brussels dictates. Any more questions? In the back row.
Two questions. Do you have any information on the engine that was used? They talked about that they were actually Pratt Whitney engine in the United Airlines as opposed, and United Airlines only used GE, General Electric.
Yeah. Well, there was, about the engines, you know, there were a couple engine parts that were found. There was a very small engine part that was found at the Pentagon that clearly did not come from a big plane. It looks like it came from some sort of missile, a cruise missile or something. It's a small fan. And the engine on Murray Street, there was an engine found in New York. That engine was found. And the most obvious thing is that that engine, although it was found on the street, was never identified. They never took it apart and showed the people, look at this engine was this part number, was put on this plane on this date, and that's Flight 175. Now, why didn't they do that? Because clearly, obviously, that engine did not support their story. If that engine was proof to support their story, they would have shown it, but they didn't. So the pieces of the aircraft that were found on the streets of New York were destroyed, just like all the other evidence. So we don't know.
Second question is, what's the end game? You know.
Well, the end game. What appears to be the end game is basically what appears to be like a world war against Islam. I mean, just what the Masons have been talking about for a long time. Albert Pike talked about it. But that seems to be the game plan that the Israelis have pushed. They're pushing constantly for basically war with Islamic states.
It's a modern-day crusade.
Exactly. Well, that's what George Bush said in the very first day, right? And then they said, hush, hush, you can't use that word. You can't use the word crusade. But what the Israelis have pushed all along is U.S. and our Western allies should go to the Middle East and wage war against those nations and states and those entities that are resisting Israeli domination in the Middle East. So basically they want a Pax Israelica, so that there will be a peace in the Middle East where Israel is the dominant party. It's the only country that has nuclear weapons, and all the other countries will basically be ethnic states as well, so that there will be nobody will have a leg up over anybody else. They'll say, well, we're all ethnic states here, and we're the ones that have nuclear bombs, and so you listen to us.
So they'll be annexed.
Yeah. Controlled. Questions?
I was surprised to come across a news article that says President Bush admits Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction and nothing to do with 9/11.
Yeah.
I've never seen this before.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that, and then George Bush made an ass out of himself at one of those press dinners that they had. You know, they had this yearly press dinner where he joked about, no weapons of mass destruction here, no weapons of mass destruction there. He joked about the fact that he had destroyed the country of Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction that they knew didn't exist. I mean, thousands of Americans died in this campaign. More than 1 million Iraqi people have died. And he jokes about it? And that's why we need to have an inquiry in this country, just like they just had in Britain. We need to have an inquiry to hold our leaders, our former leaders, responsible.
It's the only thing that's going to save America is if we people actually stand up.
That's right.
Most of them are uninformed. So.
Bingo. That's why I'm doing this. Question.
You're talking about chaos, and this is a time with a lot of potential for terror. With the Olympics coming up in Brazil, I had read the former president, the woman president of Brazil, who was ousted,
Yeah.
she turned down a contract for the Israelis to, or an Israeli company to have the security for the Olympics. And that they're saying that was the watershed moment and that they had to get rid of her. Now, I don't know if another Israeli company or if that Israeli company has the security for the Olympics, but to me that's a huge red flag.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. When you hire Israeli security, you better watch the back door because something's going to happen. Because and that's unfortunately the case, situation. As you said, Brazil Olympics is one of the situations. But the big thing that's in play right now is the United States of America. We're in this conclusion of this presidential campaign that went on for like 3 years now. But I'm afraid at what's going to happen this summer. I don't think that Cleveland and Philadelphia conventions are going to be peaceful. I'm afraid that there's going to be some real nasty business going on there. Inserting mob violence, for example, and perhaps terrorism. But I mean, this just in the past week we've seen how many in the past 2 weeks or a month we've seen like massive terror attacks happening every week. It's frightening, and it's meant to be frightening. Question there,
the
ma'am.
Zika virus appeared shortly after Rousseff kicked the Israeli company out of it. It's the old trick of the gangster hanging on a meat hook.
Question
an example of it.
All those terror attacks that you're referring to all over the country, they're false flag, and it's being fed to the people by the media.
Right.
Why do people still believe mainstream media? I pay attention to mainstream media only because I want to learn what they are doing.
Exactly. You're like me.
When you start paying a little bit of attention to some details, you realize right away that it's all cooked up, that nothing makes sense.
That's right.
If you look closely at the Boston Marathon or Sandy Hook, even if you dig a little bit, nothing makes sense. Why don't more people do it? Why aren't there more people here?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question.
And why won't more people listen?
Well, because it's a very tough pill to swallow. It's a tough pill to swallow for Americans to consider that the media is controlled, that the government is not on our side, and that this stuff is like, Americans believe in democratic elections. We believe that, and we cherish the idea that we have a free press and that we have a democratic government. We're taught since the time we're little kids that we live in the greatest democracy in the world. And when you realize that your elections are controlled, the vote count is fraudulent, that the media is controlled, and that they're doing like a 24/7 psyops against us day in and day out. Whoa, it's too much for most people to handle, and they're not ready to leave those cherished beliefs. So they would rather say, "Oh, he's just a conspiracy theorist. Everything's fine. Don't worry." As the country goes quickly down the hill into hell, and it's like we have to arrest this demise of our country, because if we don't stop the war on terror, it will destroy our country. It's doing it, just look at what's happened in the last 15 years and think what the next 15 years will bring if we don't end it. And President Bush and Dick Cheney promised that this would be a war that would last decades. It's like the old European wars that went on for 70 years, 80 years. The war in Iraq is already 25 years old. We've been fighting in Iraq since 1991, January. And it hasn't ended yet. Wait. Let's see. Anybody not asked the question yet? There's a question. Okay, you again.
I just have a quick question. Can you distinguish, or is there, when one hears about this, a distinction is made sometimes between Jewish people and Jewish Zionists, and the comment that many Jewish people were killed in the fall of the towers, and only 4 Israelis. Where do Jewish Americans who are not guilty of this, can you speak to that?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Of course, when we're talking about the culprits of 9/11, the people I named, they may identify as being Jewish, and they are mostly identified as being Israeli, but they do not represent all Israelis, and they certainly don't represent all Jews. And Jews in America are basically, to my understanding, doubly deceived. They're deceived first on the notion that they should support the state of Israel, and secondly, they're deceived, as we are, about what happened on 9/11. And so for them, it's a harder thing to do. because they first have to wrap their head around the idea that the state of Israel isn't the holy moly thing that they've been raised to think it is. They've been raised to think that that is a city on a hill, that is the last resort for the Jewish people, and that Israel is a good thing for the Jewish people. If you read what Israeli authors will tell you, people like Avi Schleim from Israel, they say that Zionism is the worst enemy of the Jewish people because it makes them vulnerable. It brings them into a war situation, and it associates them with terrible crimes that put them in danger. So obviously you can see that 9/11, these Israelis are very reckless. They're putting the American Jewish community into harm's way. Many Jews died on 9/11, as you said, but they were not the ones that got the message. They didn't get the memo in Hebrew, stay away from the World Trade Center, because at 8:47 all hell's going to break loose. The Israelis got the memo. The American Jews didn't.
Why do they keep re-electing these people to positions of power in Israel then?
Well, those are the Israelis that do that. The American Jews, of course, have nothing to say about that. And the Israeli population has changed a great deal in the last 20 years. It's becoming very, very Russian and very radical and more right-wing. So they're almost like they look at the Bibi as, they call him King Bibi in Israel. They look at him as the big, strong guy who stands up to the West. And Netanyahu says that when he's finished with America, you can blow it away like dust. He said that. You see? So it's like these people that are serving Israel today at the highest level, they're lunatics. The current foreign minister, defense minister of Israel, his name is Avigdor Lieberman. He's born in Moldavia, in the former Soviet Union. He said that the next time that Egypt steps out of line, Israel should bomb the Aswan Dam. If Israel were to bomb the Aswan Dam, tens of millions of people downstream would be killed instantly. They would be swept away. So he's talking about like a biblical catastrophe befalling Egypt at Israel's hands. And nobody in the West criticizes him, said this man's a lunatic. Nobody holds him accountable for the things he said. And so that we have allowed the Americans in the world, by giving Israel a free pass out of jail time after time after time, we have allowed Israel to become a monster state. And that's what it is. And now the monster is so big, it's got nuclear weapons, it's got submarines capable of launching nuclear weapons. It's holding the whole world like in its grip. It's like a gangster state that's now got nuclear bombs. Hello, you know. So if you're looking for a group of terrorists with nuclear bombs, look no further than Tel Aviv. Question there, sir.